Good afternoon, students, and welcome to Ms. Rogers' video lectures on world history. This is our first video lecture, and we'll cover section 3, which is called the New Centers of Civilization. We were unable to cover this topic in class, but I'm asking you to take notes on this video lecture. You may pause the video at any point and write notes. In addition to taking notes, there will be a brief survey to answer at the bottom of the Schoology video. So let's begin. Again, we are just covering section 3, New Centers of Civilization. Section 4 will be covered in class tomorrow, Wednesday. So the first thing that we're going to cover is the role of nomadic people. That's going to be the first subsection. Pastoral nomads. Write this definition down. Pastoral nomads are people who domesticate animals for both food and clothing. They move along regular migratory routes to provide steady sources of nourishment for their animals. Again, they are people who domesticate animals for both food and clothing and move along migratory routes in order to provide steady food for their animals. An example of a pastoral nomad are shepherds. Again, these people domesticate animals for both food and clothing, except they do not farm. One of the most important nomadic people were called the Indo-Europeans. The Indo-Europeans are very famous because most languages that we know of today come from these people. We don't have any writing about the Indo-Europeans, but we do know that they moved into parts of India, Western Asia, and even into Europe. The way that we know this is because of the stories. The stories of the Indo-European people are related in so many different ways all over the world. There are flood accounts in Europe, there are flood accounts in Asia, and even in parts of India. And that is why we believe that there is a center place for a center original language. I'm going to zoom into this portion of this tree. The Germanic languages. The Germanic languages such as German, English, Flemish, Spanish, the Romance languages, Spanish, Italian, French, the Celtic languages such as Scottish, Irish, or Gaulish, or Welsh. They all come from one place. All their branches date back to the Indo-Europeans. The next group that we're going to talk about are called the Phoenicians. This is a new subsection. The Phoenicians are famous for their international trade empire, and they also invented the alphabet. The Phoenicians were famous for their ships, and they were a great international sea trade. They would set up colonies all along the Mediterranean Sea. Write that down. They would set up colonies all along the Mediterranean Sea. Their most famous colony was Carthage. That will be an important city later on when we get to studying about the Romans. One of their famous nicknames is called the Purple People. They were called the Purple People because they made a purple dye. Purple is a color of royalty. One of the things that all the royals from all over parts of Europe and in northern Africa, they wanted that purple dye. But the Phoenicians were the only ones with the secret. The way that they make purple dye, surprisingly, is by taking snails and squishing them up, and what comes out of the snail is this purple dye-like substance. They're not known as the Purple People because they were purple, but they were known as the Purple People because they all were purple for the most part. And so when they traded with other nations, that's where they got the name Purple People, because of their purple dye. Probably the most famous, the most well-known thing that they're remembered for, the Phoenicians, are their alphabets. That's why we call things phonetic. It's based on the Phoenicians. The reason why so many people adopted this alphabet is not just because of its simplicity, but it's because they traded with so many different empires, and so many different cultures were exposed to their alphabet. And this was very different from all writing systems that previously existed. The Egyptians and the Mesopotamians used pictographs or signs, but the Phoenicians used 22 characters or letters that could spell out words and could be arranged in so many different combinations to create so many different words. This is greatly going to impact us because the Greeks and the Romans both later adopted this alphabet. The final thing that we're going to talk about are the Israelites. The Israelites had a lasting influence on the religious beliefs of today. Both Christianity and Islam gets a lot of their history from the Israelites. The basic of the Israelites is that they believe in the God called Yahweh. That's what they call him. Yahweh, to the Israelites, they're actually not able to pronounce that name. We later interpreted it and put an A and an E in the word Yahweh to be able to pronounce the word. God appeared to a nomad named Abraham. We all are familiar with this story, but Abraham was from the city of Ur, and he was a part of a polytheistic group. Well, God appeared to Abraham and led him into this land called Canaan, or Jerusalem. The Israelites are going to live south of the Phoenicians, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The Israelites were monotheistic, which is extremely different from all the religions that existed in this time period. Most religions were polytheistic and believed in multiple gods, mostly that pertained to natural forces and nature. But the Israelites were different, and they believed in one God named Yahweh. One of the things that happened while in Canaan, or Jerusalem, or Israel, there was a severe drought. And during the severe drought, they left the land of Canaan right here and traveled all the way into Egypt, where they were enslaved. For a few hundred years, they were enslaved in Egypt. And at one point, there was a man named Moses that led these 12 tribes out of Egypt. They crossed over the Red Sea. This is believed to be the route of Exodus from Egypt. They traveled across the Red Sea into Sinai. They were here for 40 years. And a lot of people believe that they were there for 40 years because the Lord knew that he wanted the people to enter in the promised land with full faith, and that the older generations would not enter into the land of Canaan with full faith in him. So he had to let those people die out. And then it's also during this time that Moses in the wilderness goes up to the Mount of Sinai, which is right here, and is given the 10 Commandments by the Lord. Joshua is the one who actually leads them out of the land of wilderness, into the promised land. And it is there that they set up camp and take over. The people wanted a king. At first, the first Israelite king name was Saul. Then it was David, and then it was Solomon. Under King David, the Israelites captured the city of Jerusalem. I'll show you a map in just a second of where that's at. King Solomon built, but it's not King Solomon. King Solomon is going to be the king that builds the temple in Jerusalem, most commonly referred to as Solomon's Temple. Solomon's temple was built to house the Ark of the Covenant, which is essentially this sacred box that held the Torah and the Ten Commandments. Solomon's temple, although it was destroyed during the Babylonian invasion, but it was rebuilt in 6th century BC. And then it was again destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. The only remaining part of the Solomon's temple is the Western Wall, which can still be visited today. One of the things that Solomon is known for is for his wisdom. He was a very, very wise king. One example of his wisdom is shown when they had to decide an example of his wisdom is when 2 women brought a child to him, each claiming that he was his mother. Solomon ordered that a servant cut the baby in half and give each half to a mother. One mother, the real mother, replied, "No, you can't split the baby in half. Just give him to her. Just let him live." Well, the other woman was like, "Yeah, cut him in half. If I can't have him, then no one should." Solomon said, "Give the baby to the first woman. She is the real mother." From this instance, everyone realized his wisdom, and that his wisdom wasn't from his own, but from the Lord. Unfortunately, after his death, King Solomon, the 12 tribes split into 2 kingdoms. To the north, make sure you know that the kingdom of Israel is to the north, and that the kingdom of Judah is to the south. It was in 930 BC that the Israelite empire was divided. The kingdom of Israel is made up of 10 tribes, and their capital is Samaria. The kingdom of Judah is to the south and is made up of 2 tribes, and its capital is Jerusalem. Finally, what makes the Jews so unique is that among all the other religions, despite being conquered by so many different people, the Jews would never accept the gods of their conquerors. They believed in one God and one God only, and would bow down to only Yahweh and no other gods. And so when their conquerors saw this, they were either really frustrated because they wouldn't bow down to the king who they saw as a god, but they also saw this as very interesting and unique, and were intrigued by their faithfulness. Tomorrow we will begin section 4, and I will also elaborate more on the Israelites. Thank you for watching this first video. I hope you have a great night.